So I want to start by sharing a story. About 6 years ago, there were a couple of ex-executives from Yammer, if you remember Yammer, who launched a new startup. They launched a mobile messaging app for businesses. And by all accounts, it was a great product. And they used the same go-to-market approach as they had at Yammer that worked really well for Yammer. But the product didn't fly off the shelves. They had a lot of trouble getting traction. And they sort of kind of limped along for a bit. And finally, they recognized and acknowledged they really didn't know how to take the product to market. So with some help from their board, they kudos to them, they brought in a new CEO. They brought in a marketing expert, a career CMO, a career chief marketing officer named Stacey Epstein. And she helped them identify a specific target market that really needed this kind of a product. They focused in on that market. It was a field service market, and identified some product updates that they, product features that they needed to add in order to serve this market. They figured out where these people hung out, how they purchased, changed their positioning and messaging to go after this market, and even rebranded from Kotep to Zinc. And in earlier this year, they had a successful exit with an acquisition by ServiceMax. Now I share this story, right? This company had a happy ending, but there are many, many more just like them who don't. We hear about all these amazing product successes and startup successes, but the truth is most startups fail. And there are a whole bunch of different studies and sort of a range in numbers, but they all sort of find somewhere in this sort of 70 to 90% range of startups. Now, many of you are are thinking probably, well, I work at a large company, right? You're talking about startups. Well, startups are simply single product companies. And the truth is, you may want to look at your company and think about the new product launches at your company. But I know in my experience, the same is true for large companies. And I'll share some stories from my experience as well. But this really is true broadly across the board in terms of products failing. There was another study done last year by CB Insights that looked at the top 20 reasons that startups fail. And what I found particularly interesting was that the number one reason, right, they looked at 101 postmortems of failed startups. By no means is this an exhaustive search, but they went into the in-depth postmortems where they could find them. And 42% of these startup founders claimed that there was no need for their product, that was why they failed. No market need. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute, right? Did these people actually build products and companies for a market, for a market that didn't need their product? Maybe. If you dig in, there may be a couple of other things that were going on as well, right? It's possible that there wasn't a need for their product. It's possible that they didn't find the market that needed their product. And it's also possible that they just didn't know how to position their product and communicate the value of their product to the market. But in any case, 42% is a really high percentage. If you think about the hundreds of thousands of startups every year and the fact that like 80% of them fail, right? These are high numbers. The reason I'm here today and the reason, what I want to talk to you about is how do we reduce that risk, right? I want your products to succeed. And there are any number of things that can happen that we can't control. But these are some things that I think we can reduce, places where we can reduce our risk. Who am I and why am I talking to you about this today? So I want to share a little bit about sort of my background, right? I've been doing software product management and marketing for the past 15 years. Menika gave you a little bit of a brief glimpse, right? I've worked at large companies and small companies. I launched multiple new products at Adobe, several of which failed, some of which were very successful. I've worked at startups in all capacities, consulting, advising, in-house, et cetera, leading product and marketing, including I led marketing for Freshwork for a couple of years. So I've sort of run the gamut, and I've seen a lot of these common mistakes repeated over and over, to the point where I got so frustrated that, I did the obvious thing and I wrote a book, right? So I just a few months ago released Beyond Product, which is a startup marketing book for non-marketers. It's basically aimed at anyone who's launching a new product or a new business, and takes you through each stage of growth, from proving the idea all the way through exit, and kind of walks you through what should you be thinking of in terms of marketing, how should you be approaching marketing at each stage of the business. So what I'm going to walk through today are a few themes in the book, a few things that I had seen before, and a few lessons that I learned through the process. So starting at the very beginning, let's see if I can, whoops, move my, sorry. You guys still seeing this, hopefully?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what happened there. Sorry. I lost my window for a second there. All right. So, sorry, I'm back. So, a little bit of a glitch. So, I included 50 interviews with a variety of startup leaders in the book. Did a whole bunch of interviews from investors, product leaders, marketers, founders, et cetera. And one of the things I found really interesting is there was a common thread as I talked to investors in startups. These people see lots and lots and lots of startups. And consistently across the board, though in different words, they all said, before you even start, before you start building, get a statistically relevant sampling of the market that you want to go after with people you don't know. The entrepreneurs who go out and talk to 50, 100 or more potential customers to get a lot of different market data points, they tend to get much better traction and results. The stealth idea, you're crazy. The most important thing early on is getting feedback from the marketplace. It's interesting because this is a theme that we see in lean startup and so forth, right? As they, sort of do customer research. But there was a study recently done by Obo, a company called Obo, that said 86% of product managers do little or no product research, right? We think we know. We think we know. But the reality is we don't. There was an interesting story that I heard recently about some doctors who started a company. We've probably all heard these stories about sponges left in people's bodies after surgery, or tools that were left in people's bodies during surgery. And they had a solution for that problem. They had a way to detect them so you could get them out. And of course, these doctors are experts, and of course this is a problem that needs to be solved. But apparently when they eventually went and talked to hospital administrators, the administrators said, well, yeah, it kind of sucks, but it's actually not a big problem. It's not something we'll pay for. It actually doesn't happen that often. I guess I get that these are PR, we hear about these stories, but it doesn't happen that often. And when it does, what insurance pays for it. So we're actually not willing to pay for that, right? So we think we know, but the reality is that we may not. So the most important thing you can do for product success is start with the market. I love this quote from Andy Radcliffe, right? If you address a market that really, really wants your product, they really have a problem, you have a lot of room to make mistakes. But if you execute really well on something that the market doesn't really need, you don't have much chance of winning. So start with the market. If you remember nothing else from today, that is probably the biggest way to reduce your risk of failure. How do you do it? Today there are a million different ways. I'm not going to belabor this point. Hopefully, right there. If you work at a large company or a company that has salespeople, that has support people, those people should be your best friends. Do you know those people? Are you friends with them? Go and buy them some chocolate or something, right? Because those people are your key. They're your connection to your customer. If you don't normally talk to customers, go and talk to your salespeople and your support people. They talk to them every day, hear what they're hearing, and maybe even get some introductions. Go and spend a day shadowing a customer. It's amazing what you learn. If you don't have that connection to your customer, you're reaching a new market, right? Figure out where they are. Are they at conferences? Are they at playgrounds? I don't know. Depends on what your market is, right? Do surveys online. You can use Survey Gizmo, Survey Monkey, Mechanical Turk. There are a gazillion of these tools online where you can find people and you can do research. And then buy people cups of coffee, right? To do in-depth studies and talk to them to get qualitative information. So start with the market. So all this stuff I'm talking about in terms of doing the early research. Is it product? Is it marketing, right? You know, probably you'll say this falls in your camp. It's not marketing, right? And I promised to talk to you about marketing today. So I think it's worth sort of level setting a little bit about definitions. So what is product marketing? And I'm specifically focusing on the product marketing part of marketing because that's probably the place where you interface the most and the most connected. Right? So what is product marketing? Who does it, right? What do they do and when do they do it? How do you work with them? Is marketing an afterthought for you? If it's an afterthought, if you're the product manager who plans out your release and builds your product and then throws it over the wall to marketing and says, okay, now go plan a launch and sell this to our customers, you're increasing your risk of failure, right? It doesn't usually work as successfully. So I want to offer a new definition of product marketing. And this definition actually came from someone named Greg Powell, who heads up marketing at a company called Funbox. And I love this definition when I heard it. And this was an interesting thing because everyone I talked to, right? I interviewed all these marketers and they all had slightly different definitions of marketing. The definition I like of product marketing is connecting your product with your market and your market with your product. So, right, that means everything, right? Every touch point, every connection point between your product and your customer, right? If you actually look at, if you take a marketing class and you learn the sort of classical definition of marketing, they talk about the 4 P's of marketing: product, price, promotion, and placement, right? They start with the product because it's the most important touch point. But all of those are the key touch points with your customer, right? How they find out about the product, how they buy the product, right? The product itself. It's all those touch points are critical for marketing. It doesn't mean that someone with the title of marketing has to do all of those things, but it does mean that they fall under that important bucket of product marketing, right? So product marketing can help you understand your customer, right? What are their behaviors? What are their pain points? What are their needs? How do you reach them? If you're doing product research and you're learning, right, what features resonate with your customers, all that research that you do, if you can include, most of the times we don't include marketing in that. But if you actually include marketing early on in that research, there's so much important information that they could be learning early on about the words that your customer uses, the pain points they have, et cetera. And all of that will help them better position the product for the market and help them better reach their market, right? They can learn at those points about where the customer is instead of waiting until it's time to launch. All of that will reduce your risk. And another great way that you can leverage marketing is that while you're busy solving the needs of your customers today, the ones that you have today, marketing could be going out and researching markets, other markets that you can reach with your product. If you add additional features, et cetera, or you maybe make some messaging changes or whatever it is, right? But they could be doing that research and finding new markets for you to expand to. There are a lot of ways for you to leverage marketing. And I don't care how you organize. Every company organizes differently between product and marketing, right? The line is different and it depends on your market and it depends on your company and so on and so on and so on, right? It doesn't matter. As long as you partner with marketing to figure out what are the key things like these that have to happen and you figure out who's going to do them, right? But the key there is partner with marketing and do it now. Don't wait and throw it over the wall. Don't make it an afterthought, right? So I asked some questions. We did a little survey at the beginning. I haven't seen the results yet, but nobody likes to talk about their failures, right? Everybody talks about all their product successes, and everyone's resume sounds amazing. They've never had a failure in their life, right? But we've all had, if we're all being honest, we've all had some failures. So I'm going to share one of my big ones today. So I'm guessing a lot of you have heard of Adobe Creative Cloud. Right? Huge success for Adobe. Help them make the shift from shrink wrap to services and subscriptions. Stock went up wildly, blah, 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 right? Well, the truth is, before there was Creative Cloud, there was CS Live. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, right? So around 2010, I was working in our Creative Suite business. My customers were designers and creative professionals. And if you went to visit one of them, right, you knew their process usually included, as they were designing brochures, posters, videos, whatever it was they were making, they had clients, right? They had stakeholders. They may have been internal, they may have been externals. But there were always review processes, and it was usually multiple rounds of reviews. And so when you go to visit them, you could go into a conference room and see them with papers all over the place, right? Where they would share whatever it was they were working on for review, and they would get back comments in multiple different forms. They might have gotten phone calls and they took some notes. They might have gotten emails with a couple of bullet points and comments. They might have gotten PDFs that were marked up digitally, or printouts that were marked up, or whatever, right? A whole bunch of different ways. And so they'd have everything sort of spread out, and they'd be trying to reconcile who said what and what they actually have to do, and whose feedback was more important because it was conflicting, and so on and so on. So we created a service called CS Review, where there was a web app where the creative professional could share their design via web, right? Remember, this is 2010, right? This may not seem so innovative now. This is 2010. They could share their design, and everybody could log in and mark it up and leave their comments, and everybody could see everybody else's comments. And then, by the way, since we were Adobe, the cool thing that we could do is we could bring all those comments back into the product where that designer worked, so they could see them right in line with the work, and they could, change it from blue to green or whatever they had to do, change the font and check off the tasks. We released this service with a bunch of other services as a sort of collection of services, a suite of services, if you will, called CS Live. They were a dismal failure. We had done the research. We'd done the upfront research. We knew this was a pain point, but they were a dismal failure. Why? So this suite of services was released with Adobe's flagship suite of products called Adobe Creative Suite. And every couple of years, we would have a release to a lot of fanfare, tons of marketing budget. Every startup wishes they had this kind of marketing budget, right? But when they released the suite of products, it was a whole bunch of products: InDesign, Flash, Photoshop, Dreamweaver, et cetera, Premiere, right? And so it was pages of marketing copy about what's new in all these products. And way down at the bottom on page 3, it talked about CS Live, these new services. And under that, then each service, right? Nobody made it to page 3, right? Nobody made it that far. Then, of course, people got their new apps. And in the app, right, discovering these services, if you notice in this upper right here, right, you've got this already busy product, and way up in the upper right, there's a little tiny button that says CS Live. And if someone happens to click it and scrolls down, then maybe they find these services and maybe they think about trying them. actually, even more than that, what we know about our customers and how they adopted was that these customers lived in these apps. And so when they got and installed their new product, their new Photoshop or InDesign or whatever, their first task was, how do I do today what I could do yesterday? I have customers and I have work to do, and Adobe's moved my buttons and changed things. Where is everything now? That's the first order of business. I have to make sure I can do my job. Then I want to go see what's new in the product, right? What new features can help me do things faster or better? And then these other services and stuff that seem ancillary at first, right? So discovery was a huge problem. And then adoption was a key problem, because this is a service to be used with my clients, right? My clients, my bread and butter, this is how I make my living. I can't risk my client relationship. So for a service that I'm going to use with my clients, first I'm going to test it out and see what the experience is and see what it does. And then maybe I'll test it with a colleague, right? And to make sure that that experience works. And then if I have confidence that Adobe's not going to kill the product, then I'll think about releasing it to my customers, right? So there were all these challenges. We totally failed. The good news is, right, we learned some lessons. We learned really, really important lessons that we were able to leverage to be successful with Creative Cloud, right? When we launched Creative Cloud, right, when we killed CS Live and we launched Creative Cloud, we flipped everything on its head, right? Look at the marketing. Creative Cloud changes everything, right? It's all about the cloud. And we focused on some key problems that customers had and how we could solve them because we had the cloud, right? Customers always complained about the downloader. We improved the experience with the downloader, right? My projects are out of sync. I can't sync, each product does things differently. Well, now we can help you sync, right? Oh, and by the way, you want your Photoshop? You get it from the cloud, right? So we totally flipped it, right? So my key takeaway, right? There were lots of, certainly you make, these kinds of failures, right? There are lots of takeaways, but my biggest takeaway here, right, is it doesn't matter how great your features are. It doesn't matter how great your service is if you don't solve these other problems, right? If customers can't find your product, if they can't discover it, if they can't buy it, if they can't use it, right? It doesn't matter how great your features are. Are those things product? Are they marketing? Who cares, right? They are critical to your success. And so as product managers, we have to pick our head up. We can't just focus on our feature. How many of you have built a great feature and nobody could find it? It was buried so far in your product that nobody ever found it, right? It doesn't matter how, important the problem is that it solves if nobody ever finds it. So remove those barriers. So another story, I spent the past couple of years working at a company called Clover Pop. It's a startup focusing on helping companies improve the way they track, communicate, and make decisions. And the product actually works really well. We have data from customers showing that it actually helped them, it sped up their decision-making, right? I mean, if you've ever experienced the pain of making decisions in big companies and all the meetings and how long it takes, and then decisions don't get communicated so nobody knows, et cetera, right? We were able to speed up their decision-making and make decision-making more inclusive at the same time, which improved engagement, employee engagement. But we had some big challenges, right? Number one, the go-to-market, right? The sales cycle. Selling to enterprises, it's a long, slow sales cycle. It takes them a while to make a purchasing decision for software. Add to that a new category, right? People have budgets for customer support software, right? For CRM. Nobody has a budget for decision-making software. So it just increases the time. Then add to that the adoption challenges of a change management solution, right? As soon as you are changing someone's workflow and they're a collaborative workflow with multiple people, and you have to get multiple people on board, big challenges. So we actually were able to improve our adoption by creating some really high value tools. We created this diagnostic where we could help them identify their top challenges. So we could help the execs figure out where to focus. Instead of trying to do everything, let's pick one problem and let's solve that problem. And then we can go from there. And then we developed some high value training for them, right, to get everyone on board with what was the new process and why we were changing it and what the problems were and so forth. And when we stepped back, and as we were trying to continue to evolve, we stepped back and looked, we had an aha that our customers who were really successful were not just using the software, but they were using the diagnostic, and the diagnostic and the training. And that aha was really important because we'd been following the sort of standard Silicon Valley SaaS software model of, selling software to solve this problem, right? So you have a problem, we're just going to sell you software to fix it. And we'll throw in all this other stuff. We'll throw in the diagnostic, we'll throw in the training, whatever it is to get you successful in the software. Well, as soon as we kind of freed ourselves from that model to change it, it helped us with our go-to-market challenges, right? And instead of being a decision software company, we became a company that helped you with your decision practices. It didn't have to just be about software, right? Companies do diagnostics all the time. Think about your culture surveys, right? They do training all the time. And those are different budgets. They're actually much easier, right, than selling software. So we broke it all apart, and we would offer the diagnostic and offer the training. And, then if companies are ready, then they can, and they want to, they can also buy the platform. But we broke it apart, and it was a huge difference from our go-to-market, for our go-to-market. So I think there were two takeaways for me from this, right? And one is about agility, right? We talk about agile product development, right? But this is true for marketing as well, right? Continuing to evolve and look and trying things, right? So with your marketing, don't just sort of go big, but test and learn and develop a playbook of what works and continue to evolve. The other piece is, as product managers, we often we look at the problems, right? We want to solve the problem. But sometimes looking at what's actually working, even if it's only working for a small segment of customers, will give you a clue to solving problems for your broader customer base. So be agile and look at what's going right as well as what's going wrong. So my last point, I used to work at Freshworks, right, in the customer support space. Very different from Clover Pop, in that, Clover Pop was a category creation play, and customer support is a very congested market. There are tons and tons of players, right? So I took a quick survey and grabbed some screenshots from homepages of a bunch of different offerings. And I see there's a question I'll come back around, actually. So I grabbed these screenshots. Tell me, so look at them. Is there anything that stands out? Anything that says, wow, I have to try that product? All your communication neatly sorted by priority. Omni-channel communication, multi-channel help desk, smart customer communication platform. Blah, 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 blah. Right? They're all talking about features, right? They're talking about features and functions, and you see this a lot. Look across the web at a whole bunch of different, just go to random sites and you will see this all over the place, right? Nobody cares about your features. I'm a product manager, so I say this with love. Nobody cares about your features. Maybe that customer who they've been using your product and there's something they can't do and there's a feature they really want maybe, but really, I don't think the feature itself is the thing that they care about. Look at who's broken away in this space, right? Zendesk brings companies and their customers closer together, right? Businesses are made of relationships. Zendesk helps make them better. Why do people implement customer support software? Because they need to build a relationship with their customer. They need to solve their customers' problems. They need to hear about their customers' problems so they can solve them and make their customers happy, right? That's the story. That's the benefit, right? Nobody cares about your features. Start with the story and the benefits. Then get to your features, right? And how your features will help. This will help you not just selling to customers, but it'll help you internally. Your executives don't know from, the features, and they don't care about the specific features. Occasionally you will have the executive who has a pet feature that they really want for some reason. Maybe a customer's been complaining, who knows? But generally, right, it's the story. Here's how I'm going to penetrate this market. There's a customer set that has this problem, right? I'm going to solve it, and then here's how I'm going to solve it. That's what they care about, right? Your customer has a problem. So start with the customer. Who are they? Specifically, who are they, right? Not just their B2B companies. Are they small companies? Are they large companies? Who within the company? Is it an HR person? Well, what kind of HR person? Is it an exec? Is it a junior person? Do they focus on comp or training, or what problems are they solving? What drives them? Why are they doing HR? What do they care about, right? What are they trying to accomplish? What pain are you going to solve for them? If you do that, if you really, really deeply understand that, and you can communicate that to your customers, that is what is going to make you successful. So start with the market, right? Start with the market, understanding the market. What is their problem? Partner with marketing. They can help you with this, right? Remove all those barriers, right? Not just about the features, but remove all those barriers so customers can find it, can buy it, can adopt it, right? Be agile, look at what's going right as well as what's going wrong, and start with the story, right? Before the features. So these are just a few of the things. I go much deeper in the book, but I'm happy to answer questions if I can. However you want to see, there are a couple of questions here.
Are you able to see the results?
Yes. So about 3/4 have worked on products that failed. Okay, that sounds about right. Wow. Kudos to the rest of you. I don't know if you haven't worked on that many products, or you're just, you figured out how to nail it. I don't know. So, and the variety. So lacking business model. Yep. Okay. Poor marketing, right? Poor user experience, price and costs. Yep. I mean, and many of these, right? I mean, figuring out your business model, right? That's part of the go-to-market, right? Figuring that out, making sure that you have a business model that people will pay. This is super interesting, right? And some of these, right? Ignoring customers. These are things that you can solve, right? So we certainly want to reduce those risks by listening to our customers, right? And making sure that we can solve those things early on. Thank you for participating in that. Should we address some questions?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the first one, so this is one I get a lot, right? How do you market a game-changing, innovative product which the market doesn't currently foresee or need? Right, but you're confident about a new trend. So, it's an interesting one. Everyone wants to point to Steve Jobs on this one, right? You say do research, but look at Steve Jobs, right? I mean, nobody believed the iPhone, the iPad, blah, 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 right? He managed to see it. The reality is most of us aren't Steve Jobs. Now, when I say go do market research, I think the key here for product managers is that it's not about asking, do you want this thing, right? Because you're right. With a market-changing product, nobody's going to know that they want it, right? Nobody would have told you that they wanted an iPhone. But it's trying to figure out what problems you can tap into that that people really do have. So let me give you by example. When I was at Adobe, we launched some iPad apps, right, for drawing. Now, Steve Jobs at the time said, I will never have a stylus for this thing, right? He didn't believe in it. And designers and creative professionals said, I don't want to draw on a device, right? But when we did our research, we found, you know, and this was something that we sort of knew, but we dug into the research and found every designer, right? If you were any designers you work with, I bet they all have a journal and they all sketch in their journal and make notes in their journal and stuff, right? And when we looked at their workflow, right, they would often sketch something and then they would want to use it somehow. And that process of getting it into their Photoshop, their InDesign, whatever their app they were using, either they had some kind of a, you know, trackpad and a stylus and they could sort of sketch over it and re-sketch it, or they would make a you know, copy of it, right? Somehow, like, but they had some very sort of complex, funky process of getting it, and it usually involved redoing it. We knew there was a lot of time and pain that we could solve eventually, right? By if we could get the apps good enough, if we could make them good enough for sketching on your iPad and make the styluses good enough. And we knew that it was not a quick and easy thing, and it took us years. But I was actually giving a talk similar to this a month or so ago. And in the back of the room, there was a designer sitting there sketching on his iPad, right? It's a really common thing to do. So I think, you know, the key there is, as you do your research, thinking about what are those problems and trying to tap into and understand and identify those problems that would indicate that there is a market need for whatever it is that you believe in. Does that, hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you. Jill, would you like to move on to the second question, the next question?
Sure. How do you market a product which costs more than your competitor but offers better features than your competitor? So from a marketing standpoint, if you have to market on price, so you never want to market on price. As soon as you get into a price war, then it just, you know, you end up, it's a sort of downward spiral, right? You always want to market based on better capabilities, right? Better, not necessarily features, though features are a part of it. It's how do you solve that problem? Again, it's back to the same thing, right? How can you solve a problem that your competitors can't? If you really have better features, if you really have something, you have to be careful with features because many features, you know, this week you've got a new one, well, your competitor can copy it next week, right? But if you really have a better product that solves a need better, then the opportunity there is about figuring out how can you position it differently than your competitor, right? How can you claim something that your competitor can't claim? And I think that's really the key. Does that make sense? It's hard doing this one way, you know, can't sort of get feedback and have a dialogue about it. But I'm happy to engage in those conversations sort of after the fact, if anyone wants to ping me.
Sure, thank you. Yeah.
How do you market a product which your tier 1 customer does not need, but the remaining world market needs it, with the risk of losing the tier 1 customer? So, I'm not sure if this is, so I'm assuming these are multiple products. You've got different products for different markets here. And this is sort of one of the interesting challenges as you expand. We certainly face this at Freshworks, right? Our flagship product was customer support software for small business. And then we added an additional product called Fresh Service, which was sort of a related but adjacent market, and we expanded up market and so forth. And you do kind of have to be careful if you're providing too many products to too many different markets, because it can get sort of noisy and confusing for the market. It's good to diversify, but you have to think carefully, like, is it multiple products for one market, or is it sort of extensions of one product into multiple markets? And how do you reach them? I think the key is, number one, really thinking about who your primary customer is, right? What's your most important market? Is it that tier one customer that you've been serving up to date? Or is it that broader market? And then if they're separate products, then you can sort of separate your marketing, right? To some extent, where you're really pitching product A wherever your tier one customer is, right? What channels are they in, right? How do you, is it a different brand, and you can really sort of position it separately from your, product B in other markets. It's a little bit of a broad question, so the specifics kind of matter, but hopefully that helps a little bit.
Thank you, Jill. The next, Pradeep Kumar has 2 questions. Would you like to combine it and take it?
Sure. All right. How do you decide on first key customers according to which you decide to be built in B2B products? So sometimes you have a choice and sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's a matter of sort of who is willing to engage and, pay and so forth, right? But ideally, the thing you have to be careful of here is that they are companies that actually represent your market. If they're one-offs, so sometimes we'll get some amazing, big account that's they're really a, a marketplace or something, or they're really in an adjacent market and they're not really the core market that we think we need to serve. And they'll have some weird, unique requirements that by focusing on making them happy, because those first 5 to 10, key customers, you have to make them really happy, right? They're going to be your reference customers. That's how you're going to grow your market. So you have to make sure you want those customers to be companies that are replicable, that there are many, many more like them. So you can say, you know what, I solved this problem for, Microsoft. So I can solve it for all these other, software companies like Microsoft, whatever. Not that there are, many as big as Microsoft, but there are certainly others that aspire to and that, are big software, right? Pick whatever your business is, right? I solved it for, whatever Kellogg's or whatever, Procter & Gamble, whatever it is, right? Like, you want those to be companies where there are many more like them, and they're going to have some weird requirements, but some 80% of them are going to be requirements that your other customers are going to need, so that they will help you identify a broad market. If a fresh player wishes to...
One more question towards the end.
Okay.
Yeah. How do you define
ROI on marketing spend? Some products, features are directly communicated specifically in beats. People try and test it, and you can have KPIs. So it depends on, to some extent, on what kind of marketing, but your marketing should be, your marketing ROI should be revenue, right? To any extent possible, right? You should be able to connect the dots to get to revenue. For everything you do for marketing, before you do whatever it is, you should have an objective. right? If it's a piece of content, it's a blog post, whatever it is, what is your goal with that blog post? If it is, ad campaign, what is your goal with those ads? But that's how you shouldn't invest in that marketing if you don't have clear goals set. And ideally, they should tie to marketing. There are things we do that are purely brand, right? But even that brand, those brand investments, there are ways that you can measure them, right? You can do surveys and so forth beforehand to measure your brand awareness. And then you can do follow-on surveys and so forth to identify lift and so forth, right? So start with what your goal is. What is your problem you're trying to solve? What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to sell your product? Are you trying to grow your brand because you think you have a brand awareness problem? What is your problem? And that should drive your KPIs. If a fresh player wishes to enter a market, how should they plan their marketing strategies to face the existing marketing leader? So, somewhat broad question, right? Exactly what you should do, obviously, depends on the specifics, but you shouldn't enter a crowded market unless you have a better solution, right? So there are a couple of different ways you can address this. There are some people who believe it's much harder to be successful in an existing category if there's already a category king. There's a great book called Play Bigger, if you haven't read it, about category creation. If there's already a category king, it is hard to unseat them. Doesn't mean it's impossible. You can certainly do it. But if you can sort of create a new category, if you think, I don't know how old everyone here is, but if you think back to the beginnings of Salesforce, Siebel Systems was the category king in CRM. And Salesforce came in with their big campaign about no software. And they convinced the market that it wasn't about CRM, but it was about, you don't want this on-premise software, you want cloud software. And that was the chink in the armor, right? You have to have some kind of a key differentiator. And that's the key. If you're just trying to unseat a big player with something that's, incremental, that's really hard. You really have to have a differentiator. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Yes.
Can you elaborate more on what Agile in marketing means? So what that means is marketing often gets a bad reputation, right? Everyone has probably had some bad experience with marketing where marketing spent a ton of money on some big campaign and had, and I am creating air quotes as I say this, right? No quantifiable results, right? There was no benefit. It was a failed campaign or something. And sometimes maybe it was, or maybe there wasn't alignment on what the goals were. But the key here is, and you see startups do this, they try and they've hit what they think is their product market fit, and they quickly try and scale. And so they plunk down a ton of money on big campaigns. Maybe they start going to the conferences that their competitors are in, and they're big competitors, and they're super expensive, right? That's sort of the old model. And the Agile model is test and learn, small bets, right? Place the smallest bets you can and test and see what works, and develop a playbook of what is actually working before you scale up and you spend a lot of money on anything, right? So it's a constant test and learn. Now like online marketing, whatever you do, right? You can test 100 different messages and see what works, right? You can test different channels and see where your customers are and where they respond. With everything you do, you can test before you spend a lot of money. So that's what I mean about being agile in marketing. everyone's building better mousetrap here in the Valley. Instead, how do you become agile around testing the story? So certainly you can be agile around testing your messaging, right? And as I was saying, right, you can go to Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and you can test 100 different messages and see what people respond to. The sort of earlier part is you're sort of kind of testing that story. You know, the place to start is potentially more of a qualitative, right? Talk to some customers and test it on them and see what resonates, right? And then you can test it with content, right? So blog posts and stuff, content is a great way to test this, right? Get that out there, advertise those on social, and you have a lot of room early on. In fact, if you're doing, if you are creating a new category, then doing early content marketing around kind of the problem and really seeing if there's a there and people are engaged and reading it and liking it and whatever, right? And responding and coming to try and find out more, that will help you understand whether that problem is resonating and give you room then to figure out the solution. But there is, whereas you don't want your marketing to be inconsistent in general, when you're sort of early on testing it, you can try different things and just kind of see what resonates. Lots of questions.
Thank you. Jill, could we take say 2 more questions, if it's okay with you?
Sure. When can I consider my product to be successful? I can't answer that, only you can and your company can, right? What is success? Why are you creating it? What is success for you? It's different for every company, right? Adobe and Microsoft and these big companies are going to kill million dollar products because it's not big enough for them to sustain. For a startup, that may be enough. So you have to define what success is for your business. What impact, all right, I'll take this as my last one, I guess. What impact does post-sale customer support have on your next product? On your next product. So post-sale customer support is super important to your existing product. Okay? The entire customer experience is critical to your customer's experience and their happiness, right? And if you have a happy customer, then they're much more likely to stay on and recommend you, right? And if you add additional products, they're much more likely to be interested in what products you sell, right? Especially if you're assuming you're selling to the same customer base. Or they're more likely to, if their friend asks them, they're more likely to say, oh my gosh, they provide such great customer support. They're a great company. Yes, you should check out their product. So I would say yes, post-sale customer support is definitely important to the success of your existing products and future ones. So hopefully that helps. I realize there are some additional questions. You can feel free to, ping me online or whatever if you've got additional questions, and I'm happy to try and help address them.